Hi, I'm Shelly Cohen. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska on February 8, 1939. I'm the last of, of my brothers and sister, of our siblings, I guess you would say. And I think I always say I was the accident because I was like 9 years behind my next brother, who is Donald Cohen, who has Al-Sham is deceased, passed away just about a year ago, and so we lived near 53rd and Dodge Street. I'm trying to think if we lived there, I think, till I was almost 5 years old, and then we moved to 308 South 70th Avenue, which is on the corner of 70th Avenue and Farnham Street. They had a really huge home that took almost a block, and they had it was like being out in farmland in those days. Going back to my original home where I was born. I wasn't born at home; I was born in a hospital. But once once I was there, I remember during the Second World War they had a blackout. What do you want to call it? Blackout in case that we were invaded by either the Germans or the Japanese. So that kind of stuck in my mind, and we had to draw our curtains. So that's only thing I remember about that house was that event. Those whenever they had them, and then going back to 308 South 70th Avenue, we were. I may repeat myself here, but 7th Avenue and Farnham at that time, Dodge Street was like a two-lane road. It was a red brick road, and then there was like farmland across the street, where the Blumkins and the Bats now. Oh, I don't know now, but they eventually moved there and they developed that area. Or not they, but someone developed that area. So it's like being out in the country. I went to Dundee School. I used to take the bus, catch it on 70th Avenue and Dodge, and in these cold winter days, I don't think we have cold winter days anymore because of supposed global warming, which I think might be a fact. But anyhow, it would be bitter cold, and there were like farmland across the streets. All these northern winds would just blow in you, and occasionally Peter Kiewit, who lived a catty corner on 71st Street and Farnham, would drive by, and then he'd say, roll down his window and say, "Come on in, and I'll give you a ride to school." So he was just a real nice, ordinary guy, and he did that. So, trying to think what else I can remember that time. We used to have Dad always had farmed land, and went to across the street. He had almost a lot. So my job was to, as I got older, was to hoe the rows, as they would say, plant tomatoes and corn, and which I didn't like because it was really hard work, and I had to lug water to water the plants. There wasn't any hoses out there, so that was kind of a challenge to me. We used to have a chicken house there, and so we had some chickens, and I'm trying to think of other animals. Oh, I think my sister Florence. I should go back and tell you, my sister Florence was the first one born, and then there was Arthur. He was about 2 years behind Florence, and then there was my brother Don, who was I think another 2 years, and then me, the accident. That was like 9 years behind Don. But anyhow, my father's in the meatpacking business, and I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit, but he also purchased livestock, cattle, but he found these two lambs, and he thought he'd bring them home to 308 South 70th Avenue, which he did, and they would graze the grass. My dad thought it was such a big lot that he wanted, so he had to cut the lawn so much. So we had these two lambs that were out there doing it, and my sister became attached to them. And then, trying to think what else. So we had that. So it was kind of like a farm situation out there, just like a small one, of course. And what else? I can remember the days when we didn't have air conditioning, of course, and so we would go out in the summertime and have windows down, and all we had was like driving through in the evenings, like driving through a blast furnace. And we used to go to somewhere, I think it was like several places. We used to go like to I think Irvington for ice cream, or we used to around 76th and Dodge, I think, where the Papio Creek went under the street. You could get down below there, and there was somebody down there that had like ice cold watermelon that you get it by the slice. I don't know how much the price was. I'm sure it was like 10 cents a slice. I'm just guessing on that, but I bet it's pretty close. And sometimes we would drive up to Louis Market on, I forget what they call military at that time. And they'd have all these watermelons, ice cold watermelons, in these horse troughs with big 50-pound blocks of ice floating around as well as the watermelons. And you can buy these black diamond watermelons, which are premium now, but I think those days were like a penny a pound. And it was it was our hot summer nights. I think I should jump back to my parents to give you a little background that they conveyed to me, and here I'm be conveying it to you. I'll start with my dad. He was born in 1893, and I believe he had, I think there's probably more than about 6 or 7 siblings. Anyhow, they left Russia. He was born in, I think, Kishinev. He left Russia, his parents left Russia with their children, and they were able to get out. It's my understanding that his grandfather, I'm sorry, his dad was had a job doing something for the Tsar. I'm not sure what. So he was able to get permission or papers or something to leave the country with his family. Because in those days, it was my understanding, because they had pogroms against the Jews and everything, it was very difficult, if at all, to get out of Russia. They came to the United States. I think, of course, they came in through Ellis Island. And then I think they came like in, remember correctly, sometime around 1900 or 1901 or something in that area. I have some papers that I keep that my dad gave to me, and I keep in my safety deposit box, showing papers I think his dad had, and also papers, my dad's discharge papers. But I'm jumping ahead. I'm going to jump back here again. They came to the United States, and I'm not sure. I'm sure they came to New York City, but they went to Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which is near Pittsburgh, I understand. And I remember one time, did a lot of driving trips, but one time we were back east and we went looking for it, and I'm not sure if they found it, but we went looking for where they lived. And they were there for a while, and then they found out that the U.S. government was giving away land to the for homesteads. I think it was like 60 acres pieces in western Nebraska and eastern Wyoming. It was actually between Torrington, Wyoming and Mitchell, Nebraska, which is that area I'm just talking about. They had, they went out there and they came to a place, there was no houses, no nothing. They had to, they had their own, put together their own sod home. Actually, it was hard life there. And then let's see, Dad used to talk about. You were in summertime. They had they were immigrants, of course, and it's like the Hispanic immigrants work in the fields, where the Jewish immigrants worked in the fields too. He had, Dad told me, a job for the G&W Sugar Company picking sugar beets. So that was their job. So again, it's like with the Hispanic people they're having to go through today. They went, his family, whoever it is, they went through at that time. And they had one horse, and in the wintertime, they had to go, walk probably 5 miles, I don't know, whatever it was. Every time they told the story, I think it got a little farther, but but anyhow, got up to 10 miles one time, but that's still a lot of time. They had to go, all the kids, and they all going to school. So they went, and I think the women, the sisters, which was Aunt Katie and who's Harry Cooper's wife, who was in the construction business. This is afterwards, of course. And then Rose Fair. They were on the horse, and I think maybe the youngest one of the boys was on it. The rest of them, older sons, went trudging ahead of the horse. So those were hard times going to school. My dad's, their name in Russia, the name instead of Cohen was Kononovich. I think everybody changed their name to Cohen except his brother, Harry K. And that's K-Y-E. He wanted to have that name, so he got that name. He may have taken it later in life. What else? They had, they went, but going back, my dad, the First World War was starting, and he got well, actually, I'm going to go back a little bit here. I'm going to start with my mother and go back. My mother actually was born, some of the family says France, but it was really Romania, where they came from. And then they went to France. And my mother was born in 1900, by the way. And they went to France to a small, well, at that time a small city, now it's a pretty big sized city, called Lille, Lille. It's near the Belgian border. And my mother was a very scholarly person. Her mother had died. I think it was someplace in either when they got to France or when they left Romania. Maybe that's when it died, before they left Romania. And so she had, I think she was just, she was an only child at that point. So, they came to Lille, and I believe, and I'm just trying to put things together here, but I think it's right. He found another Jewish woman, they married, and then this woman also didn't have a husband or something, and so she had two a stepbrother and a stepsister. One was Ruth, and she was Ruth Glick, and the other one was Gaston Lebobacy. Anyhow, my mother was a very learned person. She believed in education, believed in reading, and she was very a studious person. Um, and she did so well. She had uh, got, I believe, a scholarship to the Sorbonne. But at that time, there was an opportunity to come to the United States, and I think it was like in 1913. So she was 13 years old, and I don't know how they got the Sorbonne, but maybe later on in life, wherever it is, or maybe college started earlier in those days. But they had to give that up because they wanted to come to the United States. My mother was very disappointed with that. So they came to, trying to think where they came to. They came to Ellis Island, I think in New York City, and eventually, I guess, came to Omaha. So I got both parents here into the United States, and I'm going to go bounce back into my dad. My dad, the First World War was starting, and he said that they volunteered. He volunteered. I'm not sure about his other brothers, but I know he volunteered, and he was stationed in France. And I remember my dad told me never to volunteer because I got drafted in the service during just when the Vietnamese War was starting. But anyhow, my dad told me never to volunteer in the Army. So anyhow, he did in this one case. They were looking for someone to do a job. They didn't tell him what it was. So they were looking for carpenters, I think, what they wanted. And my dad knew absolutely nothing about carpentry. But he stepped forward, said he was a carpenter. So what he gave him a job was in France. He was stationed near Tours, in Saumur, and that's in the Loire River Valley, which is the wine country. I think it's near Bordeaux and all that. So, and his job was, and I guess he was a sergeant. He was in charge of a train engine and a caboose, and the job they had, he had like 3 or 4 guys under him plus the engineer, and they would go out and retrieve boxcars that the military used for shipping their materials. They had what they call hot boxes. Hot boxes. In those days, they didn't have roller bearings. They had what they called Babbitt bearings. Babbitt bearings, I believe, are bearings made out of brass and lead. And because they're 2 different metals, they wouldn't bind, and they had to keep them greased. But occasionally, they deteriorated, or no one greased them. They would freeze up. So it was their dad's job with these few people to go out and retrieve these boxcars and wrap them with oil-soaked rags on these Babbitt bearings, they call them, and nurse them back to wherever there's near Saumur, I guess you're stationed, and to repair them. But this took like a couple of days, and so they had food with them, and they had their canteens, of course, and the French in those days shipped wine. I remember my dad telling me that in these little small wood cast tank cars. And so what they did, they had a bracing bit with a small bit. It was probably like an 1/8-inch bit or a 1/4-inch bit, and they would drill a hole in this tank cars, and they would fill up their canteens and drink wine all the time. And my dad said these would run for days, he said. And get up there and get more wine. So maybe that's why I like wine today. A wine gene passed through. But it was kind of interesting when he said that. My dad had big hands. He was really a very strong man, physically strong. And he was a boxer in the Army. He was boxing. I guess he was champion or some sort. And they had boxing tournaments, within different platoons or different whatever it is. I don't know what they call them, but anyhow, he was a boxer there, and you could just I remember looking at his hands; they were just really big. So, and, he told me that on Sunday he used to go into Samur. His base is like probably in the outskirts of Samur. He used to go into Samur, and then there's people in the town of Samur would have the soldiers in and have Sunday dinner for them. And he met this woman, quite a bit. I would say she was probably 30 years older than he was, or 25. She was just a mother or whatever it was. But anyhow, she had him over for dinner. I remember his name. Her name was Madame Parenteau. I can always remember that name. And they had Sunday dinners, and Dad would bring them some things from the PX or whatever it is. So they had some foodstuffs. And so got to know him. And the reason I remember this woman is after I came around, my dad had kept up a correspondence at least once or twice a year with Madame Parenteau. And later on this tape, you'll hear about how I met Madame Parenteau. But I was telling you about this woman, and of course my dad learned French. So after the war was over, he was mustered out, and I think they gave him $100, which in those days was worth a lot of money. And so he came to Omaha and was interested in getting involved in the meatpacking business. I don't know why, but I guess because of his agricultural background in western Nebraska. Because I don't think they were farmers, they weren't farmers in Russia. But anyhow, they came to Omaha. And this little side note, his dad was a painter, actually. His dad did painting. And a house painter, things like that, building painter. So anyway, getting back to, my dad wasn't interested in that. So he came to South Omaha and to the stockyards. He knew nothing about buying cattle. He knew nothing about the packing business. And they had the walkways above the cattle pens, and he was looking, and someone down below noticed him, and he started talking to my dad, and my dad told what he would like to do, and this guy said, "Well, I have a packing house." He said, I'll show you how to pick out cattle, and then if you want it, you can buy it, buy a cow, and then you can bring it over. We'll get it over to the plant, and we'll slaughter it, and I'll keep what they call the drop and the hide. The drop is the liver and the offal, the inside of the cow and the hide, and that would be his fee for handling the cow and things like that. So my dad took him up on that, and he bought a cow, and they slaughtered it, and then he found a way to, I don't know how I think this other man found him some customers, and my dad realized that was pretty good business, so he ended up buying more, and this man kept doing it, and eventually my dad ended up buying the guy out, and so that's how he got into the meatpacking business. So that's part of and by the way, the packing house name became Greater Omaha Packing Company, and we'll go into that a little bit later on too. Getting back to getting to how my father and mother met. It was my understanding that on Saturday night, at Central High School, they would have dances, and so my dad one Saturday went, and he was there, and he heard this woman talking French. And so my dad being stationed in France, so he went up to her, this group of people, and started talking French to them. So, and so he met this beautiful woman who was Rosalie Lebobasi. By the way, my dad's name was Herman. I'm sure all you know, I know it is, but so they met and they fell in love. And I think my mother's father was in, I believe, the shoe business in South Omaha. His name was Henry Lebobasi. And he thought that the business my dad was in was not a fit business for his daughter. And he was against them getting married. So it took his sister, Katie Cooper, Katie Cohen, I guess at that time, but had married Harry Cooper, who had Cooper Construction Company. He did very well. Anyhow, at that time, this is, he had a pickup truck, meaning Harry Cooper. So he picked up my dad and his mother, and they they went and got married. I think they eloped, and that's how they didn't have a formal wedding. So anyhow, that's how they started their life. And of course, things did go very well for my dad, and so which proved the Henry Lebobasi was not right. But that's the way things happened. The and I'm not sure where they lived. I think they lived on 32nd Avenue one time, and then they moved to 101 South 53rd Street, and that's the one that was on 53rd and Dodge. But I'm bouncing around here. Anyhow, my dad, started, I told you, started business, and my mother worked for, oh God, she was a bookkeeper for, oh God, Bozell, I think was the name, not Bozell and Jacob, but may have been part of that, but it wasn't that. He was in the manufacturing business. That is like a machine type business. I think I stopped her before the phone rang. They got married. I'm not sure where they lived, but they may have lived somewhere near South Omaha. I think that's where my dad's meat packing business was. So that's where they were. And then they got married in 1921. I don't know if I mentioned that, but they did. And that's when he, I think, got Greater Omaha Packing Company. That's when that was established in 1921, too. But he had been in the meat packing business where someone was kind of, it's called like custom manufacturing for him. But now, when my sister Florence, she, I gotta do some mathematics. I think she came around 1924 in that area, 1923, something like that. And then Arthur came like 2 years after that, and then Don 2 years after that. I think we went through that before, and then I came around in 1939. So I can't tell you what went on in those days. But I know I can start now with me, I think, and I hope that's okay. When I was born, my mother had some difficult time, I guess, with my birth. At that time, she was like 39, and this was in 1939, and my dad was 46. So in those days, I think, they didn't expect children to be born at that late an age for women. So, I popped on, and so it was a difficult, I guess, birth for my mother. She was in the hospital for, I think, a month or more. And of course, they brought me home. I guess my sister Florence, I was told, took care of me, and that was I became, I guess, not knowing, but became close to my sister. And then as I got uh, older and could eat substantial food, which is probably the day after I was born, because I've been eating ever since, as you can all tell. But when I could remember, my mother, of course, made everything from scratch, and my dad, we had very substantial things. I would say substantial. We had meat packing business. We always had meat, and this is just a little digression here. In the wintertime, people in groceries, you sold mostly to grocery stores, and then in so in the wintertime, people would buy the grocers would buy chucks. They have a chuck roast or rib roast. People liked roast because it took longer to make, but they kept the houses warm. In the summertime, it was all hot, so they liked things like steaks and things that cook fast. They can cook them outside, what have you. So in the summertime, we would be eating roast because no one wanted to buy them. And so in the wintertime, we ate steaks. They wanted roast. So that's just a little side note about food. My mother cooked. She knew how to cook in the French manner. So she made wonderful split pea soup from scratch. It was all vegetarian. It was very good. I remember going shopping with her. We lived out at 308 South 70th Avenue, and finally, I think a Safeway store came in 70th Avenue, just north of Dodge Street, right on the north side of Dodge. And of course, we were on the south side of Dodge. And so I learned how. She used to take me marketing, and I used to like to look at. She'd show me how to pick out produce and what to look for. So I learned a lot about shopping. So now today I do a lot of shopping. So and I'm sure in the back of my mind I have these little messages that my mother ingrained in my head to buy this, this, and this, and look for this, this, and this. So that's what I did. Anyhow, she would make everything from scratch when she got home. And I remember we used to go downtown as I got older, and went downtown and my mother didn't drive. She wouldn't drive. So we always either took a bus or took a taxi. And we used to go down to Central Market downtown, and they used to, for buying fish. Central Market, I think, was on Harney Street, between 16th and 17th Street. And anyhow, they had wonderful fish. We would have fish on Friday. I don't know, maybe we were Catholic. I don't think so. But we used to have fish. We used to always have whitefish, Lake Superior whitefish, and that was really good. And eating steaks and sometimes chicken was, and eating meat, beef. You got tired. So fish was really, really a wonderful thing to have. It was like a treat for me once a week. We would have the fish, and my mother prepared it, baked it in the oven. My mouth is watering because I can taste it now. And she was a great chef. She used to make salads in the French manner. Now, with any dressing, she'd make it scratch, and she would prepare it in such a way that the dressing, she would put we used to use cider vinegar, put that in lettuce, and then put some olive oil in there, and then squeeze garlic or chop up garlic and put it in there, and then salt and pepper and whatever else. And then she would mix it. So in other words, all these different things were separated in the bowl with the lettuce. So she tossed it. So it was a different way of doing it. So it had a different flavor. And so because all these different parts hit the lettuce at different times. So that's a side note about that. And she made wonderful pot roast, tongue, all these things that I'm sure my children would even touch today, but that was very good tasting. And we used to have, I'm really digressing here, but it was a thrill in the summertime. Actually, my favorite dish my mother made was spaghetti. She used to make it from scratch. Really a simple recipe. I think I used to call it staghetti with an S-T when I was a kid, and I'm sure I have a whole section of that right here in my midsection, so I'm still that spaghetti. But had that. It was like a side dish, I would say, like a starch dish. But I ate a lot of it. And my mother used to also buy Central Market, and it doesn't sound good to any of our children either, but it made by herring from Holland. It came in a wooden, like a cast. I think it was called cast or a barrel, tiny barrel. I think it had like hold like 2 kilos or whatever it was. Excuse me. And we would you had to pop the rings off. Otherwise, she had like a cleaver. She would pound these the rings off, and then would kind of separate the one end, and then you take off the wood end of this like little barrel, and it was full of brine. And she would just reach in. She had like I remember a ceramic pan, a big like a ceramic soup kettle, and she'd fill up in water. And she'd take the fish and the herring and just soak, put it in there, and then soak. I think she put that in the refrigerator and let it soak for a day, and then she'd throw the water out, and then she would put new fresh water and soak it some more. And the reason why is we want to get all that salt because that's how they ship it in a brine solution. Excuse me. And then after 3 or 4 soakings, she would take it out, and then inside there was the fish were whole, so had the heads and the tails, and we cut it off. And in the center there was the what do you call it, offal. You might call it. I took it out, and there was like this little sack, and then it was like I think it was the roe from the egg. She would take that out and mash it up and put vinegar and it would make it like a cream type sauce. And my mouth is really watering for this. But you probably think I'm really crazy, you guys, but that's the way it is. And then she would cut up in slices, and then have this big glass jar, and she would stuff it full of put vinegar in it, and with lots of onions in there. And I think she put some allspice or some black peppers. I'm not sure, but put that in there, and then. And also she used this thing that she mashed up, the roe, and then made this like a milky looking substance. And then she would cut up the herring, and threw away the heads and the tails. And then take and put it in a refrigerator in this jar with a lid on it, and then and let it soak for like 4, 5, 6 days, or 7 days, I'm not sure. And then we would have, and we started eating it, we have like boiled potatoes. Again, this is stuff that you guys wouldn't eat, but I loved it. My mouth is watering just thinking about this. But we have this herring with boiled potatoes, and that was a wonderful meal. And I was weaned on that stuff. But being my mother was from. She was a wonderful chef, as I said. She was from Romania. Was a lot of dishes that were Romanian. One of our favorite dishes, which I'm sure you guys don't like either, is a dish called palagella. Palagella. They used to have downstairs in the basement. We had all these little gas grills. I think that were those days. They used to boil water for laundry. Anyhow, she would take eggplants and put them over the live flame. Excuse me, sorry about that. And roast them over the open flame, and turn them a quarter of a turn until all sides were cooked and it was all bubbling. And she used to, buy these probably 10 eggplants, big ones, and she taught me how to pick them out too. You want light ones, you take them in your hand and you kind of move them up and down in your hand. You just got to feel the weight. It has to be a light feel, not a heavy feel. And we roast them and then take it over water, and you're left with all this black stuff on the outside, which is the skin from the eggplant, and you had to really peel it off, and then that was really a job because you had to get all that out. And then we take it upstairs. And in those days, they didn't have any food processors. So they had a cleaver, so we had just chop this stuff up by hand, and and add and make it to a nice consistency, and add in chopped onions, raw onions, and then add in oil. I think in those days we used Masola oil and some vinegar, and then we used to serve because my dad had all these. Sorry about that. Had all these tomato plants and all these things we used to grow. He had really wonderful fresh tomatoes, and we had this bed of tomatoes on the bottom of this huge platter. And I say huge platter. It was this big. I don't know if you can see it in the camera. It was really this big around, this big wide oval, and about this wide. So, and then we had this bed of tomatoes under it, and we put all this pollagella, which was the eggplant. That's what it was called, pollagella, on top. And then we'd have some fresh challah that was sliced, big challah, and we would have that for dinner. We would go through this whole thing of eggplant, and we just loved it. It was like my dad used to call it a Vorspeise. Vorspeise means like an appetizer. But we made a meal out of that stuff, and we went through a whole loaf of fresh challah. There's nothing better than having fresh challah and pollagella. So anyhow, again, my mouth is watering just thinking about this. So, and I never had trouble eating. I was always a good eater. I'm trying to think what else my mom made. I remember my dad for his birthday. Remember, it was like on December 23rd. But my dad always liked a dish called Veronica's, or Varnishkas I call them, but he used to call them Veronica's. So, and that was like a ravioli sort of thing, and my mother would take, and it was a big job to make this. She would, like, the night before, she would roast a chuck roast, and she would take and cook it really well, and then I think she had a blender, actually. She would kind of take that with the onions and kind of blend it coarsely, and then the next day she would have these. She made like a dough, and then she put like a teaspoon or something of this roasted mixture of pot roast with roasted onions in it. I mean, it's like caramelized onions in there. Then she held back a lot of the juices from the pot roast, and then she'd put this in a big, like a kettle, and on the stove, and she would kind of cook this with the juices. And actually, my dad would help her with that, and he would stick a little piece of cloth in one of those, and whoever got that got a $5 reward. It's like finding the Alpha Cohen or something on Pesach, but that's what he did that. I think one time I found it. I think my dad usually found it. I don't know, he probably knew which one it was, but anyhow, one time I got it. So, but we had that for his birthday dinner. That was really yummy. I haven't had that since then. So we always had great food. I think I went through the food. I could probably talk to you about food for 3 days on tape, and you all know I like it, so I'll probably digress back to it once in a while, but as it comes to mind. So we'll talk about some other things. My mother was a person who was very learned. She loved the arts. She loved to read. She had a library with, and I say a library at home. She had she just loved books. She loved to read, and she had probably thousands and thousands of books. And those were her cherished treasures. Was that she also liked to collect figurines. So later on, when they started traveling, they acquired figurines from all over the world. So talking about traveling, as you all know, I love to travel, and I got that from my parents. I can remember, I guess my first trip, I must have been 3 or 4 years old, but I remember going to Chicago. My dad used to go to Chicago for the Meat Packers convention, and I remember going on the train. That was really a thrill for me, and we would go there. I think we stayed at the Palmer House. It's still there, and they had as a kid, the hotel had a I think they're called concierge now. But they had one on every floor of the hotel, and so you go there and you pick up your key from on that floor from the concierge, and they would do anything you want. So that was kind of nice. We always, I guess, traveled nicely, and my dad ended up doing pretty well later on in life, and so we always ate at great restaurants, and we stayed at nice hotels and traveled first class or deluxe, you want to say. So we did that. I'm not saying that to be bragging. That sticks in my mind. I guess today it kind of stuck with me. So now I try and do that, but sometimes the budget doesn't require it. So we do what we have to do. So in order to do the travel, we used to love doing driving trips. My first driving trip, I remember, and it was in 1946. We had it was right after the war. Cars were hard to find, and I guess they, excuse me, they got I think my brother Arthur, he loved cars. He was able to find a new Dodge. I remember this gray Dodge sedan. So I decided to take a driving trip to California, and he went and we left Omaha, and I remember going, and they didn't have any interstates in those days. So we went, started driving, and I guess they were having floods along the Platte River, and I remember as a kid driving through this flooded waters, and I wouldn't advise that today, but we were driving through these flooded waters, and we couldn't even see the road, but I think they had little flags there. And the water was just right up to your running board. They had running boards in those days on cars. For those who know, running boards are like little things that you could step on to get into the car. They don't offer those anymore. But anyhow, we went there, and then we got through that part. And first night we stopped and stayed overnight in a motor hotel, I think they called them, in North Platte. And then the next day, I remember driving, and we went through. Dad wanted to stop and see if he could locate the homestead that was between Torrington, Wyoming, and Mitchell, Nebraska. And we went looking, and he went to an area where he thought it was. There was nothing there anymore, except maybe some faint foundations, and he thought, well, this might be it. So we weren't sure if it was or wasn't, but we kind of said that was that. So then we continued on the next day, went to Yellowstone National Park, excuse me, and that was really a thrill. We stayed at this wonderful lodge. It's still there. I forgot the name of it, but in Yellowstone or something. I can't think. But anyhow, and then we spent like 2 or 3 days there, and going out and watching the Old Faithful erupt. And I remember the smelly sulfur smells and everything. And so we did that, and then we continued on to Montana. And I went to Helena, and we stayed overnight there. And then we went to Spokane, stayed overnight there. And then we went to Seattle, and that was really something. That was beautiful. I think we spent like a few days there. And I think also drove into Vancouver, which you could do, and saw that part. And then we went down to Portland, long driving trip. Spent a few nights there, and then San Francisco. And that was really a thrill to ride the cable cars. And I remember I got tonsillitis there, and I was in a hotel, and and they had this doctor guy. I remember he was smoking a pipe. I almost threw up because I didn't like the smell of a pipe. And we got stuck in San Francisco a few more days than they anticipated because I had tonsillitis until it cleared up. I think they had penicillin in those days. So, and then we continued down to Monterey, and then drove down to Los Angeles. Excuse me, and then we went to. I think we spent a week there because his brother Harry Kay was there, and Gertrude, of course, and all their children and whoever was around those days. He went there and spent some time. Then we drove to San Diego and spent a few days there. And then we went to Tucson or Phoenix, and then we ended up back in Omaha after a few more days. So that was like a month. We were gone for a month, and my dad was able to do that because my brother-in-law was really a nice man, Penny Davis, and he ran the packing business, and he was a very excellent business person. So my dad felt comfortable with his operation and taking care of the business, and Penny was very excellent what he did there. Then I think a couple years later, my dad got himself. I think Arthur found a car. Our brother Arthur found another car, and he got a Chrysler New Yorker Deluxe. It was a black one. That car was so long it couldn't fit in the garage. They had a semi. What they call it? It was like not automatic, but it was like you take your foot off and it would switch gears automatically. And we took that and we went to Canada. We actually went to the East Coast. Went to Chicago, and then we went to Detroit, and then we went to Toronto, and then Montreal, and then Quebec, and then Boston, and then New York, and to Washington, D.C., and then we came back, and we went back through Latrobe, Pennsylvania to see if we could find his homestead, or not homestead, their home, and couldn't, of course. And then we ended back in Omaha, and that was another month trip, so we took a lot of trips that way. I'm going to jump ahead on trips. I hope that's all right. And the next big trip we really took was going to Europe. And that really kind of was my first really interested in travel. They took a ship that was like almost a brand new ship. It's called the SS United States. went from New York City to I think it's pronounced Le Havre, France, and that was at that time the SS United States was the fastest ship in the world. It still holds the record. I think it took like 4.5 days to do it. They don't do that kind of fast crossing anymore. But it was a sleek ship. There was no wood in it. I remember they used to say the only wood on that ship is the pencil that the waiter writes your food order on. Anyhow, we went first class, which was really nice. It had a wonderful cabin, and I think I was one other girl, and me were the only kids on board. And this was like in June, and so it was really a thrill. And of course, I was a foodie, as you well know. And I remember before we going, I remember my mother took me down to I think it was called Browning King downtown. Get me a suit, and then she sat me down. I remember at a table and showed me how to eat properly. So, because I was like a barbarian, I probably still am, but I always keep back in my mind what my mother taught me was to take your soup and you first keep your hands on your lap, and then you don't put your elbows on the table, and then when you take and you put your napkin on when you sit down, and then you have your soup, and you have a soup spoon. You take your soup spoon and eat away from your plate. So that was the proper way of doing it. So I keep that in the back of my mind, but I deviate from that quite often later on in life. But I do keep that. So we had a wonderful time in ship, and it was a real thrill. And then we arrived into Paris. My mother had arranged all the hotels and everything. She knew her stuff on travel. And again, she always stayed. She had reservations at the place called the Georges V, which was the best hotel in Paris at that time. And it's still probably one of the best hotels, or one of the best there. And we got there, and they didn't have a reservation. So they had it, but they said they were sold out, and they couldn't take care of it. But they found another place, and it was a hotel called the Franklin. I remember that. And this was in 1953. And we were staying a week in Paris, and during that time, that was the time when the Rosenbergs, who were, for those of you who didn't know, I'm trying to go back, and they were convicted of being communist conspirators, and they got the death sentence. And while we were in Paris, they executed them. And this Hotel Franklin was right across the street from the communist headquarters. And I remember this quite well, and they were having riots out there. And the hotel said we should not go out that day. We didn't. So I remember that kind of stuck in my mind. So the next day we went out, and then my mother spoke French very fluently. My dad could speak French a little bit, not so much, but in fact, I'm going back a little bit. My mother's French spoke French so well, she taught at the University of Omaha French back in the 30s. Excuse me. So anyhow, she would go and use her French while we were in France. And one time I got us in trouble because she was talking to a custom agent. And those days, they didn't allow French people to leave the country. Excuse me. So they kind of detained us, and my mother and showing passports and everything. And finally, we got it cleared. I remember my dad telling my mother at that time, "Don't you ever speak French when we're going across the border, the French border, any border." He said, "Just don't do that." More into a trip of 1953 into Europe. I think we left off in Paris, and I'm still talking about Paris. My parents found this one restaurant. I still remember it. Going back on food again. It was called Osso Le Magador. It's no longer there. But when we ate out, we found a good restaurant. We'd stick with it. Well, I do that today, same way. I find a great restaurant. I'll may eat there all the time, but of course, Joyce and I'm sure the children like to have a little variety. I know they do, so I have to acquiesce some, a lot, I guess. So anyhow, we always had this wonderful meal. We always had the same thing. Every night we had the beef steak, and then we had these little trolleys they rolled around with hors d'oeuvres, and all these different things. You can pick this and this and this, and then wonderful steak we had with. Then I had a salad. I'm sorry, steak, and then with the wonderful French fries, and then they had wonderful. They had salad. I mean, after the meal, a typical continental or French is you have your salad after the meal before dessert. And we have my mother liked cheese. They have like a cheese cart they come by, and so it was really nice eating, you know. So that was that part of that there. And for dessert, we have these what they call fraises de bois, which is the most wonderful strawberries. It's hard to find them here, but when you find them, get them. They're not cheap. They're tiny little strawberries with the most. They're sweet and the most fragrant strawberries you'll ever eat. So enjoy them, and think of your dad when you have them. So anyhow, we went there, and we also visited the tourist areas in Paris, the Eiffel Tower, and the Arc de Triomphe, and the Louvre, and the museums are okay. You know, being the age I think was just graduated from grade school, so it was I was more interested in other things. But the thing I liked about, especially going back, and especially in Europe, this trip was had a lot of one-on-one with my parents, and especially my dad, which I found very nice. Sorry. So we went from there. My mother had arranged a part of the trip in advance in Paris. And then my mother went to, at that time, they had an American Express office, which also, get your traveler checks, and you had they did travel arrangements, of course, and also there's a company called Cook. So anyhow, Thomas Cook, but she went to American Express, and she arranged the rest of the trip. The rest of the trip was to go up to. She wanted to go back to where she was raised in France, to Lille, and that was Lille, and that's near the Belgian border, as I said before. So we went there, and by train. We only traveled by train, and I remember a little side note. My mother had was a diabetic, so in those days she took with her insulin and her syringes, and they were all glass, and the needles were all, they were not disposable, so you had to boil them. She would go down in the kitchens of all the hotels and get some boiling water in their pans, clean pan, and boil the syringes out every day, so she would have sterilized needles and syringes. So I remember that. So anyhow, went to Lille, and that's where she had a lot of her her primary school education was in Lille. So we visited her school, where she went to grade school. She went up there, and she entered the school with me and with my dad and me, and talked to the head lady there, and they were thrilled to see her. So they invited us all into a classroom, and they were teaching, and my mother, I remember, said a few words to the students in French to tell them it was a real thrill for them too. I couldn't understand a word they were saying. You probably think I should know some French. I know enough today to be dangerous, but I think they did. They talked French to my dad and mom. Would talk French and some Yiddish, but mostly French, to keep me from knowing what they were saying. So anyhow, I went there, and the reason I bring up, she was a diabetic. She had her favorite ice cream place, and it was called Yanka's. And so she wanted to go there, but she was my mother was a very stalwart person. I mean, she had a health problem. She would not have anything, but she wanted me to have the strawberry ice cream. That was the best, she said. So, and of course, I ate it, and it was the best strawberry ice cream I ever had. I could see what she was talking about, and she just watched me eat it, but she wouldn't touch it. And so my dad and I had the strawberry ice cream, so that was very good. And while we're there, somehow she went to where she lived, and of course that area went through the Second World War, and we somehow she was talking to someone there, and her maiden name was Lebovici. I don't know if I mentioned that before, and someone said, "Well, there is a Lebovici here." It was an elderly gentleman, so. My mother went looking for this man, and then found out it was her uncle that didn't know that he existed. He thought he was killed in the concentration camps, and apparently most of the family was killed, and I guess they didn't know this man existed, and he escaped or something. He was able, and so found him, and then he had children, and so who was really young children, I guess, so anyhow they got to know us, so we took them out to dinner and spent some time with them while we were in Lille. So that was a kind of a find, and of course they kept up after the years there. After the year there, they kept up a big correspondence. I think she brought him here. Anyhow, they brought him here to visit. They still loved living in Lille. So anyhow, after our time in Lille, we went and took the train up to Brussels, and we stayed a nice place. And again, I got tonsillitis there, so I remember the doctor there, and he was he didn't smoke a pipe, thank God. So he had a nice time, and so I remember just eating some soup and things like that. And then we went to Antwerp. It was like a day side trip. It was very interesting. Then from there we went to took the train to Amsterdam, and that was really nice. Amsterdam, and my mother, as I mentioned, she loved books, and every place we went to on that trip, she'd always stop at a bookstore and purchase some books and talk with the shopkeeper. She was very, very good about that. And so I remember in Amsterdam, she went to this bookstore, and then she went. It was near lunchtime, and so she was asking, "Where do you recommend eating?" And I said, "Well, here." He said, so he closed the shop up and said, "I'll show you the place to eat." So he closed the shop up and took my mother and my dad and myself over to the restaurant, and my mother said, "Well, join us for dinner." No, lunch. He said, "No, it's what." He wouldn't have lunch with us, but he was nice. The people were very friendly. They were very nice in Amsterdam. And so when I'm part of that trip, we went up to we took a side trip, a day trip. I think we took a taxi from Amsterdam to Rotterdam. And that was a real interesting eye-opener. The taxi cab driver actually lived in Rotterdam, but he came to Amsterdam, which they're close by each other in relative. It's like a distance between Omaha and I would say a little bit farther than Lincoln. So, or maybe Grand Island, not that far. But anyhow, we went there and we saw the bombed out. They had terrible bombings there from the Second World War, and a lot of things were not fixed yet. I mean, they were just, a lot of it was not great. So, but eye opener, and I remember the taxi cab driver. I want to stop at his home. He had some animals there. He wanted to make sure, right? So I'll stop at his home, and there we had this monkey. So I was playing with this monkey. I never saw him. My mother's really concerned, about a monkey, maybe a rabbit or something. But anyhow, and then it was a nice man, so he just showed us around Rotterdam, and he took us back to Amsterdam. And I remember taking a side trip to the Zuider Zee. They were just working on Zuider Zee is a man-made sea, and they have this huge, I'll call it a dam. It's not a dam. They're like locks they build, and they actually are recovering, because Holland is a country below sea level. They were recovering recovering land. So they would do it in like quarters, and they build these locks. And so when the tide comes in, they shut the locks, and then when the tide goes out, they open the locks up, and so the water can drain more out. So that's how they were building this, and they fill up the area, these different areas with dirt or whatever it is, sand or what have you, and that's how they acquired more land. And today it's all filled in, and they still do it. So that was very interesting. I was very mechanical mind, so was my dad, of course, and so I found that area very nice. Then then we went to we wanted to go and visit Copenhagen. And so we took the train, but the connections were such that it was a misconnect with trains, so we had to stay overnight in Hamburg, Germany. And this is 1953, and the war had ended 8 years prior. And my parents did not relish the idea, being Jewish, to stop in Hamburg, but we did. That was the only way to get to Copenhagen. So I remember getting off the train, and here's this, we got a taxi to take us to our hotel. And this taxi was a Volkswagen. And we had tons of luggage. I'm going to tell you, we had probably 15 pieces of luggage. Some were pretty good size. So this guy's had rope and tied to the roof of the car and tied to the back end of the car and tried to throw some in. And I think I was sitting on a suitcase, and I think my parents sitting on a suitcase in the back. We got all this stuff in there. And the taxi cab driver starts taking us to the driving hotel, and he started talking. He speaks some English, and he told how good this Volkswagen was. He said this was Hitler's car. And boy, my parents are not happy with that. And we were all kind of concerned, my God. And he was driving really fast, showing how good this Volkswagen is. They're actually good cars, but and how good Hitler was in manufacturing. So we couldn't wait to get out of that taxi. We weren't sure. He was driving really fast, and we weren't sure we were going to make it to the hotel in one piece. So, but we did. And then we were there, and we stayed overnight. I think enough to buy a camera. My dad wanted to buy a camera, so we did find the Germans were very good in their cameras. We did buy a camera. And then the next day we caught the train and went to Copenhagen, and that was a lovely city. That was I remember visiting this thing called the Tivoli, which was a wonderful amusement park, a beautiful one. And actually, Disney, when he first designed his Disneyland, which is in Anaheim, California, he went there to model it after that. So, but it was really, they had concert music there, beautiful rides, beautiful area. You have to go there. Even now, it's very beautiful. It has a lot of old character to it. then I'm trying to think what else. Oh, we took a side trip one of the days we were there. I think we were there for about 5-6 days, and went to up to Volendam. Volendam was north, and also to Elsinore. Elsinore, I think, is where one of Shakespeare's Hamlet. I think that's where Hamlet was conceived, or whatever it is. So coming back, we took I think they have like a train or a little streetcar. We ended up in Volendam, and then my parents, we were on a tour. I think I was at like a tour bus, and well, my parents were they went out on their own, and I was kind of independent a little bit. So I was. They said they would meet us back where I think it was like a streetcar, and they didn't come back. And so I was a little concerned, and I didn't know what to do. And so there were some American soldiers there, and they saw my concern. I wasn't crying or anything, but they just saw my concern, and they said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm waiting for my parents, and they were supposed to be here, and here, and they're not here." He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to Copenhagen, and I know the hotel." And I always they always left an address with me. That's the first time it ever happened, probably the last time too. But anyhow, we went to. So these young soldiers took me on a streetcar that went from Volendam to Copenhagen. And on the way down, I guess my parents got on through 2 or 3 or 4 stops away. And they were concerned they didn't see me, but they kind of figured, well, hopefully it'll show up in Copenhagen. So, and then introduced these American soldiers to them, and they were very grateful. So they took them all out to dinner that night. So we had a nice dinner with all these Americans. So they were very grateful, and the soldiers, for having a nice meal. They probably had a great meal at one time, and then and also my parents were very grateful, and so we had a good time. So that part of the trip was nice, and then when we left Copenhagen, they did have a train that was a through train that went all the way to Paris. Because Paris is kind of you could have gone down through Germany. My parents definitely did not want to go through Germany. So we took this train. It was a sleeping car arrangement, and the way those sleeping cars were, they had 2 people to a cabin. So they didn't have a single cabin available for me, a compartment for me. So they put me in a compartment with a Catholic priest. So that was an eye-opener for me. And so this priest was doing his prayers before I went to bed. And I'm thinking, I didn't know what about this. So I just kind of smiled. And And you probably wonder why I didn't do my prayers, but anyhow, I didn't do them. So anyhow, we made back to Paris. I think we spent another week in Paris. My mother made some more arrangements to go to the French Riviera and to Italy, Switzerland and Italy. So we did that. This whole trip, just as a side note, was 3 months long. That's a long time. And again, my dad was able to do it because Penny was there and able to, and he really knew the business very, very, very well. He was one who was really doing the business, so he knew his stuff. So he was able to do that. So anyhow, we took the train down to Nice, and we stayed in this hotel called the Negresco, and that was really a beautiful hotel right in the Mediterranean. And then I remember going, spent about a week there, and then went down. I went to Monte Carlo for, I think we stayed at the Hotel de Paris. There's always were super deluxe places. And then we went, to, let's see, I think from there we went over to Zurich, actually to Luzerne, Switzerland. And it was a beautiful city right on Lake Luzerne, right on the water there. Beautiful place with all the mountains around it. We spent about 3 or 4 days there, and then we went to this place called Interlaken, which was in Switzerland. Excuse me. And that was right in the mountains, and we stayed at this hotel called the Schweizerhof, and that was absolutely, no, Victoria Jungfrau. That was the name of the hotel. And it's named after, Interlaken's known for this mountain called Jungfrau. So the next day we went up on these cog rails, went way up high into the mountains, and it was a rail system, and then we went into this mountain, Jungfrau, and that was gorgeous. And they had an ice palace there, and it was beautiful. And later in life, Joyce and I, am really jumping ahead, but I'll get back to the trip. Joyce and I took a summer. I wanted to redo part of this trip with Joyce, and we did that. And we went to Jungfrau, and we saw the same things, and things haven't changed except the people were a little bit different, but the people were very nice. Anyhow, we ended up, after that, being in Switzerland for about a week, or maybe a little bit more. We went to Milan, and we spent like a few days in Milan. Then we went to Florence. That was really beautiful. We loved Florence. We went there for about a week. And then we went down and we saw all these different places we wanted to see. And then we went to Rome. And some of these I'm getting out of order, but I'm giving you the whole thing that we went to. And then we spent a week in Rome. That was quite interesting. I went to see the Vatican City, and Jewish boy in the Vatican City. I wasn't used to that, but anyhow, that was kind of interesting. Going back to Switzerland, my dad got to know this watch dealer. His name is, I can't remember now. It was in Switzerland, Walter Ruckli. And he got to know him really well, so in subsequent trips to Europe, he used to go, always stop in Switzerland and bring back watches for everybody. Loved Amiga watches. So anyhow, that's a side note. One of the trips we took, and I think it was when we came back to Paris from Copenhagen, we spent 2 days there, 3 days in Paris, so I'm kind of going backwards here a little bit. And then we took a side trip for about 5 days or 4 days, wherever it is, by train to go down to Saumur and Tours to see where my dad was stationed in the First World War. So we went there, and my mother had arranged for a hotel through American Express. We got there. This hotel was in I think in Saumur. Yeah, Saumur, and the hotel ended up being just a Paris Light Deluxe. This was like a stable, actual stable, with the rooms on top, and my mother just didn't like that. So and Dad and I decided to go out and see. Dad was kind of showing me some sights that he remembered, and that was kind of a nice time. In the meantime, my mother had the job to find a hotel. on her own. And then my mother is very astute, and she did her homework while she was there, and she found this hotel, which was a really nice hotel. American Express did a bad job there. So she arranged to have all the luggage removed. The people at this hotel they arranged were really upset they were moving away, but they just, because they would lose their amount. In those days, they would give you a refund if you didn't like it. So it's not that way today. But anyhow, we got this hotel, and then my mother arranged to meet my dad and myself at the original hotel above the stable. So we came there, and then we went to the new hotel, and my dad remembered this is in the Army. On the top of the hotel, they had this big ballroom. They used to have dances up there. So he remembered this hotel. So it was kind of nostalgia there for him. The whole area is nostalgia. So in the meantime, he had been in communication with this Madame Parenteau I mentioned before, and let her know that we were coming. So I think the next day we went down to some of her tours wherever she was, and to her home, and there was Madame Parenteau. We all met Madame Parenteau. She looked like she was like 30 years older than my dad, an elderly woman. Excuse me, and excuse me. She was she couldn't speak English, and my dad and my mother spoke French to them, and a lot of smiling back and forth between she and I. And anyhow, they took her, and made her take her out to dinner that night, and there was like a little tour bus that we took to take you through the Loire River. They have all these castles, and they're all lit up at night with beautiful lights. So we decided, my dad decided to after dinner, take Mrs. Parenteau, Madame Parenteau, to on this tour, which she was really thrilled. And so we went out, and I was really bored with all these castles. I mean, how many castles can you see? You castled out. But anyhow, we did that, and it was kind of nice for my my dad to see this woman. He hadn't seen her since 1917, so I was like 53, 17, wherever that is. 30 some years, 35 years, and they still recognized each other. So getting back to Rome, we took the train back to Paris. Paris is always a thing, and I think we had to stay one more night in Paris. Or no, I think whatever it was. And we ended up going to Le Havre again, and we went to England. So we had to take a boat. They didn't have any channel, and they didn't have any high-speed hover things. You were just boats that took like 8 hours to cross the channel, or 6 hours to cross the channel, which is a really rough crossing. So we did that, and I remember I was playing gin rummy with this one English guy on board. Everybody was getting sick, and he was looking at us, look at all these bloody rotters, he said. Getting sick, he said. And you and I were the only ones that didn't get sick. So we were just playing gin rummy all the way across the English Channel. Anyhow, we got to, there was a boat train, they call it. So it was a train that takes you to the ship, and then you take the ship, and then, there's another train waiting on the other side. So anyhow, went to London, and then we were there for a little over a week, and it was quite interesting. Areas that kind of stuck out with me was the bombed out areas, and where the Germans actually targeted the Jewish areas of London with their V2 rockets, and kind of devastation there. But we really, London, I really enjoyed it, especially because I spoke English there. And I remember when we went to, I forgot, some show or something, and it was a comedy act, I forgot what it was called. But anyhow, you couldn't understand a word they were saying. I was speaking Cockney English. The place was roaring with laughter. And my parents, I could not understand a word they were saying. Another side note, one of our stops in Paris, remember my mother wanted to go to the Folies Bergère. So they took me with them. Well, little did they know what the Folies Bergère was. And at that time, my hormones were starting to really generate. So they took me, all these nude women and all is really something. And my mother was really kind of hiding, trying to hide this from me, but I didn't. I was really enjoying every minute of it. So that was just a side note. So anyhow, getting back to London, we I remember we used to go to the Cumberland Hotel several times. We had dinner and they had dancing, which was kind of nice. My mom and dad danced. Once in a while I danced with my mom, and they had dinner and everything. It was done in the British style, so it was really like dinner dancing, and that was very nice. And I remember going up to visit Shakespeare. Can't remember the city. Should have been losing it. Where Shakespeare was from, and that was interesting. And Stratford-upon-Avon. I remember going there, and then so I'm dwelling a lot on that trip. So we probably don't erase a bunch of this stuff. You should, but anyhow. Then we ended up taking, after a week or so in London, we ended up going down to Southampton. We caught the SS United States going back. Excuse me, to back to New York. So I'm sure I'm leaving off a bunch of stuff, and and Bert and Mark, they probably think I'm too long-winded, which I probably am. So you could probably edit a lot of this out, but just give you some history of what I've gone through in that part of the trips. And then we did many other trips together. Most of them were driving trips, train trips. We loved the train. So that was my travel escapades. My mother was a very liberal woman. She would take papers that I'm sure the CIA, if they had them, or the FBI, was probably had a dossier on my mother because of the papers. She'd take she'd get like a United Electrical Workers newspaper, and they consider that a communist organization. But my mother believed in helping workers out. She supported when the packing house was trying. When the workers were organizing the packing house, she was there. She supported the workers. That was kind of a tough time there, but anyhow, but she was that way. I mean, I admired my mother. I remember she brought in Miriam Anderson, one of the people that bring in Miriam Anderson to Omaha. She and to sing. I think it was at Jocelyn or somewhere. I'm not sure where. This is way back in the early 50s, or I'm not sure exactly time, or late 40s. Brought her in and had made arrangements for her to stay at the Blackstone Hotel. At that time, the Blackstone Hotel was the best hotel in the city, very nice hotel. It was owned by the Schimmels, a Jewish family. So anyhow, when Miriam Anderson went to check in at the hotel, they would not let her have a room because she was black. So Mrs. Miriam Anderson called my mother and said they won't let me have a room. And so my mother said, "You wait there." And so my dad and mom went down there to the Blackstone Hotel, and the clerk wouldn't let her in. She says, "I want you to call the Schimmels." And they did. She got on the phone, and my mother really raised a ruckus with Mrs. Schimmel. Said, "You take care of this. You take care of Miriam Anderson, and you better give her a suite, or you'll never have our business." Because we gave them a lot of business because of all the activity. They were one of the best restaurants to eat at in the city. They took care of Miriam Anderson. I think they even comped her. So that was it. My mother was always quite a woman. She was a fighter for the just causes of people, and that was one thing I admired in my mother. And that's probably why I'm somewhat a liberal person. Okay, I think now I should talk a little bit about schools and things like that. So I went to Dundee. I think you know that. In those days, 1 through 8th grade. I loved mathematics. I wasn't so great in English nor spelling. I remember my brother Arthur used to always help me with my spelling, I always had every Friday I had spelling tests, and I was a terrible speller. But he would sit down with me and we'd dwell and dwell on these words, and then finally I would usually get 100 in there. But the next day I probably could not spell any of those words again. So anyhow, we made it through the test. Then went to Central High School, and that was a new experience. And let's see, I enjoyed again. My favorite subjects there were algebra. Geometry I didn't like so much, but algebra, I liked algebra. I loved geography. English was not one of my favorites, but I muddled through there. And physics I enjoyed, biology I didn't. So it gives you like an insight of my education. And then after that I went to, after graduating from Central, went to University of Nebraska. I went there for 1 year, and I did fair. And then I ended up, I wanted to be an engineer, and I wasn't cut out to be an engineer. And then I came back to Omaha, and then I went to school at that time at OU, Omaha University. And I went there for whatever the balance of the time was. And then not too much. Omaha U was just as a municipal school, and so you lived at home, and that was the story there. And I took more business classes. I really enjoyed the business classes a lot. So that's the story about the school. In a way, I'll come back to that. After I got Omaha University, went working at the packing house. And actually, during the years I worked in the summertime and down in the packing house, I would Penny taught me how to. He taught me a lot about sales. I'm going to go back a little bit about Penny and my sister Florence. We were. It was always a treat. They lived down in the first apartment was in Mary. It was. I forget where it was. Turner Park. I think Turner Park apartments. And yeah, I used to go after school from Dundee and spend the weekend with them. And Penny used to take me down the plant on Saturday, and I always just found a thrill. As I got older and they had moved her home, and my parents started. Dad and Mom had an apartment close to Beverly Hills in California, so they would kind of winter out there, and I would stay with Penny and BB at their home. And when Dave and Henry, start to come on the scene, I would be their babysitter. And so anyhow, I used to spend a lot of time with Penny. Penny used to take me down the plant, and then I would work in the summertime, down the plant. And Penny taught me how to be sales. And one thing I really learned, I really admired about my dad, was during the Second World War, it was really difficult for people to get meat. But my dad made sure that all his clients, his customers, had meat, so they would not be out of business. And they all did get meat. And he didn't. Some people were not honest. My dad was a very honorable man. Some people were charging, things under the table. My dad wouldn't do that. He was an extremely honorable man. And anyhow, I always used to use the word. He says, "My word is my bond," and this always was the case. I don't think that lasts today when people don't honor their word. Dad certainly did. So anyhow, I remember when I started selling meat, I would call up the grocers, and we had like special. Penny had this little sheet that had specials of the day or the week, whatever it was, and chucks or what have you, or livers. And I would most of the ones that really took care of the Jewish butcher shop, the grocers, and so I started talking to the owner, and Ben's here doing this interview with me, and I remember this grocery store was called Nachman's, I think, wasn't it? It's called Nachman's. They were on, and his dad used to talk to him on the phone, and they all said the same thing. I started in with these specials, and they stopped me and said, your dad took such good care of us when we really needed help. We know you'll give us the best price, and this is what we need. And that was it. We always didn't discuss price. And we did. I mean, we just gave him whatever the best price was. And Penny made me, after I took the orders, he took me around to show me how to pick out the meat. So I took the orders, I knew what he had, and then I went into into the coolers, and with Penny, I would pick out the meat. And he said, well, and Penny knew everybody, what they like, what they don't like. So sometimes I would pick something, and I said, they don't like this, and this is why. I mean, not that they don't like it, but he instructed me what to look for and what these people wanted. Different people wanted different things. Like a chuck, and someone wanted a fatter one, someone leaner one, someone big one, someone small ones. And so that was he was a very good teacher, and he was like a father to me. He was a mentor. So I think a lot of Penny of that. So, and he was a very good man. I mean, he knew his people. He knew, so anyhow, I won't dwell on that. So, and then I would load the truck, weigh it up, do the invoices, load it up, and deliver it out to the markets. And I have to unload it. And especially I enjoyed one of the best stops was Nachman's, and Ben was there, and I mean this sincerely. Ben's sitting right across from me, and you don't get to see him, but I do. And it was always a friendly face, and it was a really good camaraderie there, and I mean that sincerely, Ben. It was a very. I usually try to make that the last stop, so I didn't have to worry about anybody keeping them waiting. So, I don't know if they liked it, but that's what I did. Some of the difficult places to get in, but we had a lot of Italian grocers. Well, an Italian grocery store. By the way, a little side note: my mother loved to eat cheese. She liked cheeses, especially like Camembert and Roquefort and all that stuff. The more pungent smelling cheeses, and my dad hated cheese. So, and because of that, I think I took the side of my dad, because I didn't like the cheeses at that time. Now I'll eat all these cheeses, but I wouldn't do it there. That was terrible stuff. So anyhow, going to the Italian markets, the Italian people love their cheeses. And so I would have like a 4-quarter on my shoulder. And to get into the coolers, you had to go this narrow opening between the two meat cases, and then you have to make a turn, and you open up this cooler door, and there's where the meats in there. They also stored their cheeses in there. It almost was big. The smell would come out of there. What I do is I would hold my breath in this tight cooler. I say tight, and I wasn't that big in those days. I was big, but wasn't that as I am today. and it was pretty hard. There's hooks, and I had this heavy piece of meat on my shoulder, and to hit that hook and holding my breath, and I'd make a couple of stabs at those hooks, and then finally I'd hit it, and I'd probably turn blue coming out of there, and I'd take this deep breath coming out of that. Goes there, take his deep breath, and all these Italian butchers look at me like, what is wrong with this guy? Little they know I hated cheese. So that's just a little side note of my escapades at delivering meat. So, and yeah, we had do all that, and it was part of the game. So we knew everything. I did clean up, wash the truck out when I get done, and so we learned everything. I wouldn't do anything on the slaughter floor. I wasn't into that. I wouldn't do it, and they knew it, and didn't require it. But they taught me how to do boning and how to cut the meat up and things like that. So it was a good training, and not only in meat, but also in a lot of these things transferred to me later on in life, and how to treat people, sales techniques, and so on and so forth. So that's a good thing. I think, digressing to the future, I think I've used that with you, Bert and Mark, to give you a good work ethic, and I think that's important. um, getting on to my life, I got drafted during the Vietnamese War into the Army. Um, they I got my draft notice in Omaha, and this was like in January, and my parents your grandma and grandpa were in California. So when I got that draft notice, that when you get drafted, that's not such a good deal. So I didn't know what to do, but I kind of thought about it, and I said, I think I'm going to go to California with this draft notice, and go to the draft board out there in Beverly Hills, and show them what I got, and we'll see what happens. So I went out there, and I said, I got this draft notice. I'm here with my parents, and they had this place on Wilman Drive in Burton Way. This is their address, and I'm staying with them. What do I do? And they said, well, here, give me your draft notice. Some woman said there. And I will contact your draft board in Omaha again. So the woman in Beverly Hills said, you're not drafted, but you'll be on our next draft notice. So I said, what does that mean now? Does that mean I'm drafted at this point? Or will I be drafted with the next notice? He said, you'll be drafted with the next notice. You're not drafted right now. So I said, thank you. And I left, and I talked to my parents. I said, I'm going to be drafted again on the next thing. So I said, I think I'm going to go to the Army recruitment thing and see what there is, what my choices are. So I went there. I had a nice guy to talk to, and I guess they all seem to be nice. Who knows about those anymore? But anyhow, the guy wanted to know what I was interested in. I said, I'm interested in electronics. So he said, and I said, in the Vietnamese War, I think if I mentioned before, but it was getting pretty hot and heavy then, and I did not want to go to Vietnam. So he said, we can do electronics, and I said, what about places I'm going to be stationed? Will I be, I said, I'm interested in going to Europe or the Pacific, not the Far East. So he said, what we can guarantee you is you can go to either Europe or the South or the Pacific, and get electronics, and but you have to sign up for 3 years as opposed to 2. And I said, well, and then I said, what about reserves? And he said, well, then you'd be, after the 3 years, you'd have inactive reserves. If I was drafted, it's still the 6 years. You'd have 2 years, 2 years of active duty, 2 years of active reserves, and 2 years of inactive reserves. So I opted for that, and then so anyhow, I ended up. I signed up, so I ended up going to for basic training. In Omaha, I would have gone to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is, they say, was the hellhole of the Army. I ended up going to Fort Ord, California, which was I was out there, and that was really great duty, because the rules are whoever is the commander is, he has to do what you do. In other words, if you go on marching, he has to go marching with you. I mean, you can't do whatever you got to do. He has to do it. You just can't sit back. So this guy was retiring. He didn't want to do all this stuff. So instead of going in marches, we did marches. But instead of going marches, we ended up going by truck. And I remember we had what they call bivouac. Bivouac was after a few weeks or months in the service, or a few weeks, I guess I would say. It started raining. We were supposed to go bivouacs, like going at like camp at night and what have you, and it started raining really heavy, and I had what they call sheltered half, as half of a tent, and the guy I was with had the other half, and it was raining, and it was and you had these tent poles, and they were sinking in the ground, and the water was running inside there, and I guess the commander had the same problem, so he decided to call it off. We all got back into the trucks and went back to the barracks where we had to dry out and had a good evening. So that was our bivouac. We didn't have to do that. So that was nice. It was nice service. I remember one little side story. I was when I first came to Fort Ord. It was a Friday, actually. I wanted to go to Friday night services. You know, the military lets you go to Friday, services. So the guy who was in charge of the barracks was a guy who I didn't know anything about Judaism at all. That was probably the first time I ran across a Jew before. So, and I said, I would like to go to service. And he says, well, you can't. We're cleaning the barracks. I said, oh, I think I can. He says, no, you can't. I said, yes, I can. And I'm going. He said, then you'll be I forgot what you got, AOL. No, that's not AOL, WO, whatever it is. Anyhow, you'd be absence without leave. AWOL. I said, well, I'm going. I think I have my rights. So I had made arrangements, someone to pick me up, and actually it was a Seventh-day Adventist who picked me up. I guess they observed services that night too, on Friday night. So the guy was really upset with me. So when I got, and there was other people at the barracks, other guys like me who saw what was going on. And so anyhow, and after service, I got back. I didn't know what to expect, and I went back to the barracks. And here is this guy who was on my case came up to me, and he said, you were right and I was wrong. He said, I'm sorry. He said, I didn't realize that you had your religion, all people have their religions come first. So he apologized. So later on, I said, well, what changed mine? I turned around. He said, well, we kind of worked him over, he said. So they weren't happy to know me, but they were very nice. So we all became friends after that. So so that was a little side note. After boot camp, whatever they call it, I forgot it. So I went to what they call advanced training. I ended up in a place called Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and that was it was electronics, and that was really a nice place. And I learned to do fix radio receivers and things like that, and so I really enjoyed that because it was handy and I enjoyed electronics. And they liked me so well, they kept me there for teaching. So I ended up teaching there for the balance of that year. And then I got orders to go to the Pacific. And I wasn't sure where, and then I found out my orders were to Hawaii, which was a good choice. And I got leave. Oh, a little side note. Let me go back. Before going to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, I came back home to Omaha, and I went to Bethel Synagogue, and there was Rabbi Kripke. He found out, he knew I was in the service, and asked, how are things going? And I said, fine. And I told him where I'm going. He said, when you go there, it's a nice synagogue. He gave me the name, I forgot the name, but he says, I do remember the rabbi's name. He said, you see Rabbi Rosenberg, he said, you go to this synagogue, you see him and tell him I say hi. So then I got to Fort Monmouth, and I remember I got there, and that next day I think went to services. Actually, I walked it, I didn't have a car or anything. So I walked to services, and there I got there early. It was like a 5-mile walk, but it was those days I weighed like 160 pounds. You can't believe that. But that was really light. I mean, like a 32 waist or something. But anyhow, went to this synagogue, and I got there early, and we're sitting I was sitting in the it's kind of rotunda there, where you kind of sit down. Or not rotunda, but whatever it is, place where you sit down before you get into the synagogue part. And here's a guy calling out my name, Shelly. And I looked around, and here was this guy. I almost forgot about him when I was in Omaha University. I forgot his name. He was what they call a bootstrapper. He was in the military. And I forgot all about him. We used to come over and have Shabbos dinner every Friday night at our home. And it was like, it was probably 3 or 4 years after that. Let's see, whatever it was. Anyhow, here was the same guy. And just like, and I forgot all about him. And so it was like an old acquaintance that whoever ever think you see him. So anyhow, it was time for the service, and I went there, and then it was this rabbi was really good. This Rabbi Rosenberg, a young man, a really good rabbi. And the way out, what they do there is the rabbi goes down the center aisle on the end, and everybody then gets up, and he's at the door to greet you on the way out. And there, and came to my turn, I came up to him, and he looked at me and says, "You're not from here." I said, "No." And I said, "Rabbi Kripke says hello." He looked at, "You're from Omaha?" He said, "Yeah." He said, and he said, there was a whole line behind me. He started talking to me. He said, "Oh," he said, "Just after I get down here, I'll see you in a social hall." So I saw him, he came up to me, and then we started talking. He said, when I told him I was stationed at Fort Mom, I just came here, and he said, "Are you single?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Are you interested in Jewish girl?" "Oh, yeah," I said. He said, "Do you have a car?" I said, "No." "Okay," he said. He didn't write anything down. They didn't write. Yeah, told me where I was. He said, "Tell me where you are." And Sunday, I get a call in the barracks from this Rabbi Rosenberg. And he said, "You got a pencil and paper?" I said, "Yeah, here are 5 girls with cars." So they were fixing me up. And meantime, at the synagogue, was a couple on the other side was there, and he had Fort Mom was right on the edge of a town called Eatontown, and this guy had a bar, and he lived above the bar. He and his family, father, mother, and their daughter, much younger, and then a son. And so every Friday night, he said, "You come up here, we'll have Shabbos dinner with us, and then we'll go to synagogue together, and you'll have to walk." I said, "Okay." So we got to know them, so I would have a Shabbos dinner with them. And anyhow, it was a nice time there. And then the Army would let you have part-time jobs, which I always like to keep busy. So in the meantime, I got a car. I had... I think my parents brought out a car to me, or maybe I came home on leave and I got the car. Anyhow, there was this car of mine. I had it there, and then so I got a part-time job. The first place was in a place called Long Branch, and I worked on TV. And my job was this woman named Mrs. Reisman, a Jewish woman. So she was. Had this TV store, and color TV was just coming out. She sold mostly Zenith and Admiral. I remember those. And when we they bought a TV. It was 2 of us had to deliver these really heavy TVs out there, and then you had to go and set them up. It was like, it's not the day where you plug them in, they all run. You had to go degauss them, and you had to go set the colors up, and you had a color generator. It was a real major thing. And then when I wasn't doing that, I did her books. I like numbers, so I did her bookkeeping. So I did that. And then one day she said, "Well, I had to go and do collections," which I did not like. She wanted me to collect from the deadbeats. There was one guy go up there, went up his door, a really burly guy. And I said, "I'm here to," I said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, Mrs. Reisman sent me here." I guess you owe this. I said, "You tell Mrs. Reisman that I'm not going to pay it." I said, He said, "If you don't leave my thing, I'm going to beat you up." I said, "Well, I didn't want that." So I left. I went back to Mrs. Reisman. I said, he didn't want to pay. He was going to work me over, he said. And she said, "Well, you have to go and get it." I says, "I'm not going to do it." I said, "Well, you're going to have to." I says, "Then I'm going to quit." So I just left her. So I noticed. So anyhow, a couple days later, I found a place called Neptune City, which was close by. It was another TV play, another store. And it was a guy, I forgot his name. He was another Jewish man. So he got talking. I told him I'd do, and I do bookkeeping, and I have I can help with the TVs and things like that. So he gave me a job, and then he said, he said, "You have a car?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you single?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'll tell you what. You come here tomorrow. You start working. You come here at 4:00. And I want you to pick up my daughter." He said she's going to Douglas College, which is near The next day I came there and pick up his. I think that's the day he said he wanted me to pick up his daughter. He didn't tell me his daughter. I came there to work. He said, "I want you to go pick up my daughter," and said, "Here's $20. You take her out to dinner too." So I didn't know what to do. So I did. He had a picture. So I did that. So my job was every Friday is to pick up the daughter. He wanted something to go on, but I wasn't interested in her. But we had dinner together, and that was it. So I worked for them until I left. I got my orders to go. At that time, go to the Pacific and to Hawaii, and so I drove back to Omaha, and it was and I think I had like a 2-week leave. So and the government gave me air tickets from Omaha to, I think it was Oakland, California. But anyhow, it was near Purim time, and my mother, made a bunch of Umintashen for me to take with me to go to Hawaii. She made 60 of them. In fact, I had these big box of Umintashen. So they were freshly made the day before I left. So I left and I arrived into the Oakland, and then taken the Oakland Army Terminal, and I was on a ship to go to Oakland Army Terminal, from the Oakland Army Terminal to Honolulu. So I get on the ship, and they have a formation there, and they asked for volunteers. And I remember, I was an enlisted man, I wasn't an officer, and I remember people saying, all you're going to do is going to get KP, for the whole ship. So the whole crossing, you're going to get KP. So I didn't want that. So I didn't know what to do. And I remembered back in my mind that Grandpa, my dad, told me that never to volunteer. But I thought, well, what could be worse than KP? I was thinking. So I decided, they were looking for 3 volunteers. So I put my hand up, and there was 2 guys on either side. I said, what could be worse than KP? I said, let's volunteer. So they looked at me, so they said, they put their hands up. So they chose the 3 of us. So they dismissed the group there, and then there was just they want us to hold back. So we did, and then this guy came to us and said, well, the job we're giving you is company clerk. We need 3 of them. They're 8-hour shifts. So I said, well, that's a good deal, and you get your own cabin. Each one of you get your own cabin. So it was really a very good duty. So we had to go and meet the commander, this officer in charge of the troops. What they did, the officer in charge was a person who was also being transferred somewhere. It was an officer, the most senior officer. And he would be in charge of all the troops that were being transferred. And that was his job. So I get there, and the guy was a doctor, and I looked at his badge, and his name was Cohen. So he didn't know what he was doing, so much neither did I. So he said, it's not going to be your job here. He said, we'll just play it by ear. So I said, okay. And whatever, we all said, okay. Then he dismissed us, and then I kind of hung back. The guys left, and so I went and I looked at him. I said, he saw my name was Cohen. I said, the first thing out of my mouth is, I said, do you like Umintashen? He said, I love them. I said, well, my mother, we have 60 of them. He says, well, it'll last us the whole trip, he said. So we were eating My job was keeping him with Umintashen, and that was it. Didn't do a darn thing except eat Umintashen across the Pacific from Oakland Army Terminal to Honolulu. So that's my story there. When I got to Honolulu, I was stationed at Fort Shafter. There was another place called Schofield Barracks. That was not so great, but I didn't get it. Shafter was a great location, and it was like a country club. So I was good duty for an enlisted guy. And then I had I worked in an extinct volcano, actually, And I did a job was coordinating transmitters and receivers, and I worked from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, and that was very, very good duty because no one would bother you. The work and most of the supervisors were civilians and military, but were civilian guys, and so they didn't care, so it was good duty. So one of my jobs was to go out at night and get food for everybody in my car. Bought this big Chrysler Saratoga and so I from a commander, a naval commander. So anyhow, would do that and good duty, and so I decided to go to services while I was there, and in the Army they had a chaplain. They had services. Well, they had Friday night services on Thursday, and I thought, well, that's not appropriate, because they couldn't get anybody coming Friday. So I said, well, so finally I decided I'll go to services and wherever they have services in the city in Honolulu. So all they had was a Reformed synagogue. I didn't know anything about Reform, but I went there. So I went there on Friday night, and that's when they had their service. They didn't have Saturday service. I think they had Friday night, and there was this one girl I met, and it happened to be Bette Midler, and she was. She wasn't a very good-looking gal, and as far as I'm concerned, and she was a gal who was a real mouthy person, but she was the only Jewish girl available, so we went out a little bit, and I remember New Year's Eve, her dad was a dentist. He did very, very well. They had a beautiful, beautiful home right on the ocean on, I think it's called the windward side of Oahu, which is the island Honolulu's on. And it was a really nice place. We were there for New Year's Eve, and it was nice, but I didn't care to do anything with her. She was just too mouthy. So anyhow, that was my episode with Bette Midler. My parents came out there. They wouldn't fly, so they took I think the SS Constitution from San Francisco to Honolulu. And my dad and I had one of the best times of our lives, at least to me it was. We wanted to visit the Big Island. Big Island is where Hilo is and Kona is. So he and I flew there, and we had like 3 days together, one-on-one with your dad, my dad. And that was the best time I ever had with my dad. Anyhow, getting back to our time in the Big Island, it was a great time, and then we rented a car, and at that time, you probably heard of the volcano. It's called Kilauea, if I'm not mistaken. Those days you could walk up there and walk on top of the crater, and it was rare. You could see steam coming out of the ground, and your feet were. I can still feel the heat on my feet today. If I might talk about it, it was really warm on the soles of your shoes. The heat everything. So now, as you well know, it's an active volcano and it's everything. So we went there and spent time there, and then we went to several other places there, and we flew back to Honolulu. But that was really a nice time with my dad. And it was a good time with Mom too, but it was a rare time for me. So I'm going to try and do that with all you guys too. So we're not going to try. We are going to do that. Trying to anyhow. While in Hawaii, my duty I said was good, and then at night the guy when I had days off. It was nice having the days off, but then you were on a normal schedule. So the problem is. Your normal sleeping schedule. Working midnight to 8, I would sleep in the morning. And then I had a part-time job with a company called Pacific Electronics, and they dealt with it's like a radio supply store, so transistors, tubes, what have you. And then it was owned by a guy named George Solarano, and I learned a lot from him. He's actually a Cuban guy who left Cuba during Castro time, and he really was good in sales, and he knew how to treat people. One thing he said, there was like 2 of us on the counter, do not gang up, never put 2 people on a customer. One time we did, he got really upset with us, but he said do 1 and 1. So we learned that one after that one episode. We did the wrong thing, but he was a very good businessman, and he was very good sales. And again, I gleaned some things from him too. One time there, a customer was like a Army major, or whatever it is, and he had his wonderful trimaran boat, and he asked somebody, his Uncle Penny, like boat sailing, and I got talking with him, and he said, there's a regatta this next weekend. He said, I'm looking for some help on the ship, and I had that weekend off. I said, fine. So I went on this race. It was a 3-day race around Oahu. Started Friday. So it's like 2.5 day race. So that was really a nice time. God, it was nice in the ship. We actually won the race. So that was a nice experience. There's other things that happened. I can't think right now, but and I'll maybe come back to it, but I don't think so. But we had just I know. Working also midnight, 8 o'clock, and one of the civilians was a guy named Al Kakoa. He was a Hawaiian guy. And we used to go on weekends with him. He was a good friend of a guy named Don Ho. Don Ho was a guy who sang in a place called International Marketplaces in Waikiki Beach, and he was the most popular guy there. And we always had a table right in front of him, and he always used to sing this song, I'll remember. And he also has an expression called, let's suck him up and loosen up. So he was a big drinker. He loved, so we had drinks on the table, and we'd buy him drinks, and he would drink these Mai Tais and what have you, and we all drank them. And we became very good friends. So we always got treated very well there. So that's about the size. Again, I spent about 2 years in Oahu, and we did some I did with another friend of mine. I can't remember his name. He went some visits island Kauai, and I think I was there, or maybe one other place. And on Sunday, I used to go down to the Air Force, called Hickam Air Force Base, and they had a nice NCO club there. They used to have wonderful breakfast, I think like 75 cents. You had steak and eggs and what have you. And also my thin days. And they had like little dinghies you could use and just go in Pearl Harbor there, and so we had a good time. I had one scare there. I couldn't swim. I went one day with a guy, and I didn't take a life jacket, and we turned over. And the guy said, hold the boat, and then here comes a guy with a boat, and the boat got swamped, but it still would be afloat. So they told us, so in order to get the water, we had to take, and they attached a thing to a rope to the front of the boat, and they would take it fast to get the water to go out the back. And we'd hold down, but we'd have to let go so the boat went down. And I told the guy, I can't swim, and I don't know why I didn't take a life jacket. He didn't have one either, but he could swim. He says, just hold on to me. I said, okay. So I did, and then I panicked. But they saw I had a problem. They came around and grabbed me right away, and I didn't drown. I thought I would have been goner then. That's the only time in my life that I really was scared, and I panicked. But I'm here today to talk about it. So I always take a life jacket. So that was probably the scariest time of my life. Then after the service, I came back to Omaha. And in the past, when I was worked in the packing house, I became good friends of Bert Render. He was a fantastic man. That's of course you all know his mom's father. You didn't have the luxury of knowing him and meeting him, but he was a fantastic man. He was a good person. So anyhow, I got to meet him, I think, kind of a strange way. One day I was taking a load of, they had a rendering works in the packing house, and they produced, they used to render the byproducts in the end. What means they cooked it, and then they were left with tallow, which they accumulated, and Procter & Gamble would buy it in tank cars. And then they had what they call cracklings and that was the hard material. It was like the bones and what have you. And then so they would, every day they'd have a load, and I would take it over to this place called Mid-American Milling Company. And the first time I took it there, it was a hot summer day, and like July or whatever it was. So the way you do is you have to drive. They had their own scales. You drive on the scale, you got out of the truck, and then they weigh it, and then and there. So I went up to the office and I said, "Where do I go?" And the guy said, "Well, take it over to this one door here, and here's a shovel." So and the guy happened to be Bert. So who I didn't know at that time. So I shoveled it out, and it was a smelly thing, and it was a hot day, and when you shovel the stuff out, it was just like dust in the air, and so I was covered with this crackling dust. All I could see was my eyes and my teeth, I think, when I got done. Came back in the office, and it was really air conditioned, nice and good, and so, and here's this man again, that Bert, and he introduced him to Bert. So Bert came up and he says, "You ought to tell him to get you ought to get a dump truck." Yeah, I said, "You're absolutely right about that one." I said, "Well, I'm going to make sure they have one." He said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Well, it's my dad's company." He says, "Your dad's company? If I knew that, we would have shoveled out the truck for you." I said, "Oh, that's right." So he respected me because he knew I wasn't afraid to work. So we got having, excuse me, no, we clogged up there. We got to having lunch almost on a daily, or most of the time, at Johnny's Cafe. And sometimes we had breakfast together because he used to come down early because he had to open up his place and I had to open up the plant, the Great Oil Packing Company. So became very good friends. And then this is before I went into service and all that. And then when I got done with the service, I remember it was in February, when January got out, and I think I went to Mexico and visited your Uncle Arthur, and then came back, and then I decided I'm going to work in the packing house. And it was like 1966. No, yeah, 1966 in February. So I go to Giant's Cafe, and there's Bert. He always makes a motion. I don't know if you can see this in his hands. Just come and sit down with me. So I did, and then started talking, and he asked me, "You out of the service?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm happy to be out." And in our conversation, I asked him if he knew any nice Jewish girls, and this was February. Well, he says, "I have my daughter Gail," and I knew Gail, and Gail wasn't there anyhow. I said, I tried to be tactful, and I said, "Gail's a nice person," I said, but I didn't do anything, and she wasn't there anyhow. I think she was in college. So in the meantime, I kept having lunch and breakfast, what have you, in Giant's Cafe. And then comes June 28th. I'll remember that one really well. And I wasn't going to have lunch that day at Johnny's Cafe, but I decided I was delivering a truckload of stuff, but I was pretty close to like 12:45 or something. I got there and looked kind of scruffy. And there's Bert, and he motioned to me to sit down at the table. And there, he was sitting in a booth, and there at the table was Bert, and there was his wife, and then there was this really good look. Hold on. So I saw this beautiful girl at the table, and it happened to be your mom, Joyce. And at that time, I didn't know that, but I kept looking at her, and she looked really beautiful and like a lovely person. So after lunch, I got back in the packing. When I got back at the packing house, I called Bert because he was a good friend of mine, and he didn't tell me about Joyce. But so I thought I have to call Bert up and tell him I'd like to ask Joyce out. So I did. I called him up, and apparently what happened, he said, "Sorry, me, I'll call Joyce." So in the meantime, he called Joyce, and that was all right. So anyhow, that was the beginning of our getting to know each other, and we went out quite a lot. And I remember the first time I went to their home
for dinner. I was greeted at the door by Bert and Grandma Ruth, and then Joyce's three other siblings, and then there was Joyce's mother's mother, and Joyce's father's mother, and a female dog. So they're all women at this home except for Bert. So they grabbed me, and I didn't have a chance after that. The rest is all history. Um, Joyce had made arrangements to go to Vienna for junior year abroad. She was going to go for the whole year. And I was kind of upset, but, because I really was falling in love with her. And so when she left, my phone bills were quite a lot, and they were. In fact, about a month ago, I was going through some bills. I still save those phone bills, and they were like $80 calls. Same call today would probably have been by $5, but it was and $80 was a lot of money in those days. So. And I wouldn't date any other girls. Occasionally I would go out with Susie Silver because that was Mom's good friend. I felt that was a safe thing to do. So on our dates we would go and talk about Joyce. So I don't know if that was a good idea, but it was all right. And I remember one night your Grandma Ruth and Bert came in. We were at the Blackstone, and I forgot the name of the room. They were having a salad after a movie, and so they stopped and said hello, and then apparently after that, I guess Grandma Ruth sent a letter to your mom, saying that Shelly's ready to. Said I saw Shelly out with Susie Silver, and I would we know that you like to go to, stay there for a year, and Shelly's ready to get married. She said, I don't know if he'll be available. And, he likes to travel, and you like to travel. When you come back, we stay a year, who's going to listen to what you're going to have to say about your time there? And you can share these wonderful moments with Shelly. So Joyce decided to come back. And so I met Joyce when she came back in New York City. And I was staying in a hotel, and Joyce had family there, so he stayed with them, and so Bert got us tickets to a musical called Man of La Mancha. So it was a great time, and together, and every time we hear the music from Man of La Mancha, we always think about our time together. So after she got back, I think it was like in January, and then I think February 8th was my birthday. I had bought a ring. In fact, I had a diamond I bought a long time before then. I bought from Ike Freeman, who was with Borsheims, and they were downtown. I bought this diamond, not knowing who it was for. I had bought a diamond just to have a diamond. I had it in my safety deposit box. And then on February 8th, I kind of figured out a ring size, and I had it mounted for an engagement ring. And I went to Mom's home and to propose to her. And I didn't know the whole family was there. I didn't know what to do, so I said, let's go. I've never been down your basement. I said, let's go down your basement. And Grandma Ruth said, there's a mess down. You don't go down. I said, I want to see something down there. So finally I went down there. Joyce took me down and went down there, and I popped the question with the ring. That was a nice time. So she accepted, of course, and the rest is history, as you well know. So the rest of it, I think you've heard the rest of the history of Mom and me and how you guys came around. So, and probably some of the jobs I've had, I'll discuss with you now. I think after we got married, I wasn't interested in the packing business, but your grandfather, who never met, but Bert was saying that he had an idea of going to hide trimming business. So I decided he had another man that could do the trucking, and the reason why he wanted to do that was the packing houses were dumping the hides into the rendering, and what I mentioned, the cracklings, and that would raise the protein level, but it was called an indigestible protein, and they got paid by the protein, but it was not a digestible protein, and it actually contaminated the whole thing. So Bert found a company that would purchase the hide trimmings called Peter Cooper Corporation, and what they did is they made glue and things like that out of it. So he wouldn't buy materials that had hide trimmings in it, so which forced the packers to look for another outlet for the hide trimmings, and so he had a company that he started called Mid States Byproducts Company, and and my job, I went to work. I was one of the, I don't know, whatever it was, went and took care of buying hide trimmings. He used to go to different hide plants and packing houses to buy the hide trimmings, and the other man took care of the trucking part. So he did keep track of the fuel reports and all this. So things worked out pretty well with him, but we had some partnerships. I think my dad always used to say, one should never have partners in life, and if he should, it should be only his wife. So he was right. So this partnership arrangement, not with Bert, that worked out fine, but this other guy, his name was Clyde Huddle, did not work out right. So when your grandfather, Bert, passed away, this Clyde Huddle got together with Peter Cooper Corporation, and they were the only people that would buy hide trimmings. And they formed a coup. So the coup was they got rid of Grandma Ruth and me. So, and we were upset. In the meantime, I got a real estate broker's license, and I had to find something else to get a real estate broker's license, and then I also started selling real estate, and I did pretty good. It was okay. And then decided eventually, I don't know how I did. We ended up buying the home we are today, and it needed a sprinkler system, and somehow a guy who was helping me, I had some apartments, he helped me with the apartments. That was Chris Briley. He said, let's put in our own sprinkler system. So we did. And it worked, and then I had friends who wanted sprinklers, so I ended up getting in the lawn sprinkler business, a company called Rainmaster. I think you all know that. And I did that till 85. We got the business kept growing, and it's hard getting help because it was a seasonal business and keep good people. So eventually I sold the company to someone else. And then I got involved in the travel business. And travel business is a fun business. If it wasn't for the real estate investments, we'd be destitute. But the real estate helped keep us going. So we had some tough times. I went through some, during the late 70s, interest rates were so high. I mean, I thought I had to file bankruptcy. It was like, somehow I survived. I don't know how I did it, but I survived economically, but barely. And but things have worked out since then. I got a call from a woman, Dorothy Huddle. I forgot exactly when, but it was sometime in the early 80s, I think, 83 or something like that. And he said, Clyde is dying. And she said that he wants to talk with you. And I said, is that okay? I said, yes, that's okay. So he gets on the phone. He's dying of cancer, and he can hardly talk. But he said, I want I want your forgiveness, he said. I did something wrong. And it's always been on my mind. And I says, I'm dying, and I don't want to go to the grave like that. Will you forgive me? And I said, yes, I would. I said, we all make mistakes. And that was it. And but that was something that, when somebody does something wrong, later on in life, it's sitting in the back of their mind, and you had to give forgiveness. And that was it. So the rest of the history, I'm kind of jumping ahead and probably going to call it pretty close to the end here. Unless Ben has some other ideas I do. You know about our trips. You know about my working what I did in life, the history before you're around, and things before we discussed. I think went over that. I probably forgot a few things, but I think we got things pretty well in there. And I hope when you have your children, you all will, I'm sure, you can share these thoughts with them. It's getting near the end here, and in our telephone conversations, I always say, I love you, and you know that very personally. You all are very wonderful sons, and you too, Leslie. Not a son, but a daughter. And we're happy to have you, and we hopefully someday Mark will have someone special too. But I love your mother very much. We've had some difficult times because of your mother's health, but she's a great woman, as you well know. And I always tell her, she sometimes doesn't think this, but I always tell her, I'm lucky to have you. And if I had to do it all over again, it would still be the one. And if I had to have children all over, I couldn't get better children than you, both, and a lovely daughter like you, Leslie, too. So just in closing, I love you very much. You're always in my heart. I'm always there for you, and I'm always there to help you, both whatever you need help with, okay? I love you very much.